cold, sterile air of West Ridge Animal Shelter carried the faint scent of antiseptic and resignation. In the dimly lit back room, a large German shepherd lay motionless on the examination table, its once powerful body now a shadow of what it used to be. His ribs protruded beneath a dull, matted coat, and his hind legs, twisted unnaturally, were utterly lifeless. The fluorescent lights above cast an unforgiving glow over the metal table, where the final injection sat prepared, a quiet end for yet another abandoned animal. Maximus did not whimper, nor did he resist. He merely stared ahead, his brown eyes dull with quiet acceptance, as if he understood his fate and had already surrendered to it. Dr. Eleanor Foster tightened her grip on the syringe, hesitating. This wasn't the first time she had stood in this position. As the lead veterinarian of West Ridge, she had seen more than her share of hopeless cases. Dogs left behind, neglected, sick beyond saving. But something about this one felt wrong. A soldier's dignity still lingered in his tired gaze, a silent defiance that unsettled her. She sighed, pushing down the emotion creeping up her throat. She couldn't afford to hesitate. There were 20 other animals in the shelter that needed her attention, and this one, this nameless crippled dog, had no future. Still, she reached for his collar, out of habit more than anything else. Most strays came in with nothing but tangled fur and broken spirits. Yet, as her fingers brushed against the worn leather, she felt something solid beneath it. Her brow furrowed as she pried the object loose, revealing a small, military-grade metal tag hidden under layers of grime and tangled hair. The engraved letters gleamed under the harsh light. Maximus, MWD 821K9, Medal of Valor. Handler, SSG Gabriel Connor. Eleanor's breath caught. Her hands trembled. She had heard that name before. Gabriel Connor, the fallen soldier whose bravery had made national headlines. 3 years ago, he had saved his entire unit in a deadly ambush, giving his life so others could live. His partner in combat? A German shepherd named Maximus. But Maximus had been presumed lost, missing in action after the explosion. No one knew what had happened to him. And yet, here he was, abandoned, paralyzed, moments away from euthanasia. Eleanor's heart pounded. This wasn't just another stray, this was a war hero. And she had almost signed his death sentence. Eleanor Foster stood frozen, the military tag resting cold and unyielding in her palm. The name Gabriel Connor sent a jolt of recognition through her. It was impossible to forget. 3 years ago, his name had dominated the headlines, a soldier who had sacrificed himself to save his unit in a brutal ambush overseas. His final act of heroism had been recounted in newspapers, on televised tributes, in the hushed, reverent voices of military veterans who understood what true sacrifice meant. But what struck her now wasn't just the name, it was the second line, etched with unwavering precision into the metal. Maximus, MWD 8821K9, Medal of Valor. Her stomach twisted. Maximus. The war dog who had fought alongside Gabriel, who had reportedly gone missing after the attack that claimed his handler's life. Missing. Not dead. Eleanor looked back at the frail, unmoving figure on the table. Could this truly be him? The same fearless K9 who had once detected hidden explosives, who had raced into enemy fire, who had saved American lives with his instincts and training? The dog whose name had been engraved on military records, spoken with reverence by fellow soldiers? Now he lay here, a forgotten remnant of war, discarded like just another stray, his body failing him in ways no battlefield ever had. A cold chill ran through her. How had it come to this? Her fingers clenched around the tag, its weight suddenly unbearable. She had to know. Without a second thought, Eleanor grabbed her phone and typed Gabriel Connor, Military K9 Maximus into the search bar. Within seconds, dozens of articles flooded the screen. One headline stood out immediately. Fallen Hero, Staff Sergeant Gabriel Connor's Final Mission. Her eyes scanned the text, heart pounding. Afghanistan, a night raid gone wrong, an ambush, a single trained K9 detecting an IED just seconds before detonation, warning his unit in time to save them, but not fast enough to save his handler. Gabriel had been killed instantly. Maximus, wounded but alive, had stayed by his side until reinforcements arrived. The last confirmed sighting of him was on the battlefield, refusing to leave his fallen partner. But after that, no records. No mention of where he had gone. It was as if he had vanished. And now, here he was, paralyzed, starving, a breath away from death. Eleanor swallowed hard, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Someone, somewhere, had failed him. And now she had a choice: erase him from existence with a single injection, or fight to uncover what had led him here. For the first time in her career, she knew there was only one answer. The afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the quiet suburban street, but inside the Connor household, the light barely touched the shadows lingering in the corners. The home, though tidy, carried the unmistakable weight of absence, the kind of silence that settles after a great loss. In the living room, Isabel Connor sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She wasn't drinking it. She was only holding it, as if the warmth could anchor her in the present, keep her from drifting back to the day everything had changed. A folded flag sat on the mantel above the fireplace, its stars and stripes still crisp despite the years. Next to it, a framed photograph of Staff Sergeant Gabriel Connor stood in solemn remembrance. A young soldier in full uniform, his confident smile frozen in time. And beside him, seated at attention with sharp, intelligent eyes, was Maximus. Isabel's gaze flickered toward the window, where her daughter, Sophie, 8 years old, sat curled up on the window seat, staring outside. She wasn't watching anything in particular, just lost in a world that no longer included her father. She hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years, not since the day 2 uniformed officers had knocked on their door. Isabel clenched her jaw, the memory stabbing through her like a blade. The carefully measured words, the practiced sympathy in their voices. "We regret to inform you, your husband's bravery saved lives. He died a hero." As if those words could make up for the gaping hole his absence had left. And then there was Maximus. For a while, he had been Sophie's last connection to Gabriel, the only comfort in the chaos of loss. But when his condition worsened, his hind legs weakening, and his body failing, Isabel had been forced to make an impossible choice. She had found an organization that claimed to specialize in caring for retired military canines. They had promised treatment, therapy, a second chance. She had trusted them. But then, the howling began. Neighbors had started whispering about an abandoned dog, locked away, crying through the night. By the time she had tried to find Maximus again, he was gone. Disappeared. She had failed him. Now, as she sat in her quiet kitchen, staring at her silent daughter, Isabel's phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words sent a shockwave through her. "Mrs. Connor, my name is Dr. Eleanor Foster. I think I found your husband's dog." Eleanor Foster had been in the veterinary field long enough to know when a battle was lost. But this wasn't going to be one of those times. She refused to let it be. The fluorescent lights of the West Ridge Animal Shelter flickered overhead as she stood in the administrator's office, hands clenched at her sides, heart pounding with frustration. Across from her, Calvin Roberts, the shelter director, sat behind his cluttered desk, arms crossed. His expression was one of practiced indifference. "Dr. Foster, we don't have the resources to take in a paralyzed military dog," he said flatly. "He's unadoptable. The humane thing is to put him down." Eleanor's pulse spiked. Humane? She slapped a thick manila folder onto his desk. Medical reports, military records, documentation that should have made him see reason. "This isn't just any stray," she snapped. "This is Maximus, Staff Sergeant Gabriel Connor's canine partner. He saved lives in combat, and now you're telling me his reward is what? A lethal injection?" Calvin sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I get it. It's a tragic story, but we have policies, and you bypassed them when you took him off the euthanasia schedule." Eleanor's fingers dug into the edge of the desk. "I bypassed a mistake. If I hadn't, we would have put down a war hero." Calvin leaned back, unimpressed. "Who's going to pay for his care? We don't have funding for long-term rehabilitation, and I doubt the military's going to swoop in with a blank check." Eleanor gritted her teeth. He wasn't wrong. The shelter was overcrowded, operating on razor-thin margins. A paralyzed dog with an unknown prognosis wasn't exactly high on their priority list. But she had a plan. "I'm not asking the shelter to cover anything," she said, voice steady but firm. "I've already contacted Dr. Leonard Walsh, one of the best veterinary neurologists in the state. He's agreed to evaluate Maximus. Calvin raised an eyebrow. And if his condition is irreversible? Eleanor didn't hesitate. Then I'll deal with it. But we're not making that call without knowing for sure. Silence hung between them, thick with unspoken challenges. Finally, Calvin exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Fine. But he's your responsibility now, Foster. Whatever happens next, it's on you. Eleanor didn't care about responsibility. She cared about Maximus living to see another day. She turned on her heel, heading straight for the exam room, where a broken soldier lay waiting. And this time, she was going to fight for him. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as Eleanor Foster guided Isabel and Sophie Connor down the quiet hallway of the veterinary clinic. The rhythmic beeping of monitors echoed softly from behind closed doors, a steady reminder of the fragile line between life and loss. Isabel's grip on her daughter's hand was firm, but Eleanor noticed the way Sophie's fingers trembled, how the little girl's shoulders tensed with every step. It had been 3 years since she last saw Maximus, and even longer since she had spoken a single word. "Are you sure about this?" Isabel whispered as they reached the heavy door at the end of the hall. Eleanor hesitated. No, she wasn't sure. Not about anything. The odds weren't in their favor. Maximus had barely survived the surgery. His body was weak, his spirit was fractured. The chances of him even recognizing Sophie, let alone responding to her, were slim at best. But something deeper than logic compelled her to try. "Just give it a moment," Eleanor said softly before pushing the door open. Inside, Maximus lay still on his recovery bed, his massive frame weakened by time and trauma. His breathing was steady but shallow, his hind legs wrapped in soft braces, the once strong muscles now withered from neglect. His ears twitched at the sound of their footsteps, but he didn't move. Sophie hesitated in the doorway. For the first time in years, she wasn't staring blankly, she was staring at him. A long, agonizing silence stretched between them, and then Sophie took a single step forward. Her voice, small, broken, barely above a whisper, escaped her lips for the first time in 3 years. "Max?" Eleanor barely had time to react before Maximus's ears flicked upward. The change was subtle but undeniable. His dull, unfocused eyes suddenly sharpened, his breathing hitched, and for the first time since he was found, he tried to move. The effort was weak, his front paws shifting against the blankets, his body straining against the weight of his own exhaustion. But it wasn't just movement, it was recognition. Sophie took another step, her breath catching in her throat. "Max, it's me." Maximus let out a low, shaky whine, not of pain, but something deeper. Something Eleanor hadn't heard from him before. It was the sound of a soldier answering roll call. Isabel gasped, hands covering her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. For 3 years, Sophie had been trapped in silence. But in that moment, a war hero dying in a shelter, a little girl lost in grief, both had finally found their way back. The first few weeks of Maximus's rehabilitation were a battle unlike any he had faced before. There were no bullets, no enemy lines, just his broken body and the uphill fight to reclaim what war had stolen from him. Eleanor Foster had transformed her small home into a recovery center, her once pristine guest room now lined with soft orthopedic mats, medical equipment, and a custom-built ramp leading to the backyard. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, she sat beside Maximus, running her hands along his frail frame, whispering words of encouragement that she wasn't sure he understood. He was still fighting to live. That was enough. Isabel and Sophie came every day, watching, hoping. The little girl who had once been locked in silence now sat beside her father's loyal partner, gently stroking his fur as he learned how to move again. But progress was slow. Some days, Maximus seemed to fight back against his own weakness, attempting to lift his weight, to stand. Other days, he would simply lie there, exhausted, his brown eyes clouded with frustration. What if he never walks again? Isabel asked one evening, her voice tight with doubt. Eleanor exhaled, placing a comforting hand on Maximus's back. Then we keep fighting until he finds another way to live. It wasn't just about mobility, it was about purpose. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Charlotte sat on the floor, carefully flexing Maximus's hind legs, a daily exercise to keep his muscles from further deterioration. As always, he allowed it without resistance, but today, something was different. As she gently stretched his paw forward, his leg twitched. It was barely noticeable, just the faintest flicker of movement beneath the thick fur. But it was enough. Eleanor saw it first, her heart nearly stopping. "Sophie, do it again." She did, and this time, Maximus responded. The shift in the room was instant. Isabel gasped, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Sophie's breath hitched. Maximus let out a small, determined huff. He wasn't just existing anymore. He was fighting back. From that day on, his rehabilitation took a new turn. Hydrotherapy, weight-supported exercises, nerve stimulation, every single step was a battle, but he was willing to fight. And beside him, so was Sophie. Together, they weren't just healing, they were reclaiming what had been lost. The day had finally come. A crisp autumn breeze whispered through the trees as West Ridge Veterans Memorial Park filled with people. Soldiers, families, journalists, and strangers, drawn by the story of a war hero who had defied the odds. The stage, draped in patriotic colors, stood at the center of the field, flanked by banners displaying photos of Maximus in his prime, proud, strong, a soldier's guardian. Eleanor Foster stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clenched at her sides. She had spent months fighting for this moment. For Maximus, for Sophie, for the legacy of a soldier who had given his life for his country. And now, it was time. The murmurs in the crowd faded as Colonel James Holloway stepped up to the microphone. His deep, authoritative voice carried across the park. 3 years ago, Staff Sergeant Gabriel Connor made the ultimate sacrifice for his unit. He was not alone on that battlefield. By his side, through every mission, every threat, every moment of danger, was Maximus. A hush settled over the audience. Maximus was more than a military working dog. He was a warrior, a protector, and even after losing his handler, he survived against all odds. Through hardship, through injury, through abandonment, he never gave up. And thanks to the unwavering dedication of Dr. Eleanor Foster, Isabel Connor, and a brave young girl who never stopped believing in him, neither did we. Eleanor exhaled sharply, emotion swelling in her chest. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for. From the far end of the park, Sophie appeared, walking with quiet confidence. And beside her, Maximus. A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd. He moved carefully, deliberately, his gait still carrying the traces of his long battle. His right leg dragged slightly, his steps were slower than they once had been, but he was walking. A roar of applause erupted, military officers standing at attention, some saluting, some clapping, all watching as a fallen soldier's partner took his rightful place among heroes. Tears streamed down Isabel's face. Eleanor felt her own throat tighten as she watched Sophie kneel beside Maximus, gently fastening his new service vest, one embroidered not with a unit insignia, but with a title he had earned in a different kind of battle. Therapy dog. The war had taken much from him, but today, he had won. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across West Ridge Veterans Memorial Park, the celebration had begun to wind down. Families gathered in small clusters, veterans shared quiet conversations, and a sense of closure settled over the crowd. But for Eleanor Foster, Isabel Connor, and Sophie, this was only the beginning. Sitting on the grass beside Maximus, Sophie carefully adjusted his vest, her small fingers tracing the embroidered words, "Therapy dog, healing heroes." She had memorized every stitch, every thread, as if it were a medal of honor. Maximus, once frail and broken, lifted his head, his deep brown eyes scanning the faces around him. He was no longer the forgotten soldier left to fade away in a shelter. He had a purpose again. Colonel James Holloway approached, his footsteps deliberate, his presence commanding. He kneeled beside Maximus, gently placing a hand on the German shepherd's head. "You did good, soldier," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. Maximus responded with a slow, steady wag of his tail. Nearby, Isabel watched her daughter, the girl who had spent years trapped in silence, now speaking, laughing, living. It was impossible to separate their recovery from Maximus's. He hadn't just fought for his own survival, he had saved Sophie too. Eleanor stood next to Isabel, exhaling softly. She had fought so hard for this moment, for Maximus to have another chance. Looking at him now, standing tall beside Sophie, surrounded by the people who had saved him, she knew she had done the right thing. "He'll do more good than we ever imagined, won't he?" Isabel whispered. Eleanor nodded, watching as a young veteran hesitated nearby, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Sophie noticed, then gently guided Maximus toward him. The man knelt slowly, reaching out a tentative hand. Maximus leaned into his touch, offering the quiet, steady presence that only a true service dog could give. The veteran's shoulders shook once. Not from fear, but relief, Sophie smiled. She understood. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. Maximus wasn't just a survivor. He was hope. And in that moment, as laughter and quiet tears mingled in the fading light, she realized some battles don't end in war. Some battles are won in the hearts of those who refuse to give up. Maximus's journey was more than a story of survival. It was a testament to resilience, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. He had been a soldier, a guardian, and a protector. And even after enduring loss, abandonment, and pain, he never stopped fighting. But his greatest act of service wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the quiet moments of healing, in the way he helped a grieving child find her voice again, a mother rediscover hope, and veterans regain their strength. This story reminds us that no life should be discarded simply because it is broken. Maximus was left to die because he was no longer useful in the eyes of a system that had once relied on him. But with patience, love, and care, he proved that his value was never in his ability to run, but in his ability to heal. How many animals, once cherished, once loved, are abandoned when they are no longer convenient? How many dogs, like Maximus, are thrown aside because they are injured, aging, or no longer fit the expectations placed upon them? They deserve better. Animals are not disposable. They are our companions, our protectors, our silent confidants. They love without condition, and in return, they ask only for kindness. They trust us with their lives. Shouldn't we be worthy of that trust? Let Maximus's story be a call to action. Rescue, foster, adopt, advocate. Whether it's a stray on the street or a retired service dog in need, every life is worth saving. And sometimes, in saving them, we find that they save us too.